Dr. Chaffee, thank you for coming on the show.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so uh, in an effort to take advantage of the time you're given, um, I like to keep the conversation pretty casual, and I've heard you talk a lot about meat, so I want to get into that. I want to get into carnivore and the human diet, but I'm also just genuinely curious about your background. Um, because you're in Perth right now, correct?
hmm
So why Perth? Because you sound like you're an American.
Yeah, no, I am American. I only moved here like 5 years ago. So I, I played rugby at a really high level or very high level and professional level for a while. And I was an All-American in high school, and we went to New Zealand as part of the U19 national team. And always, yeah, I mean, absolutely had an amazing time. And I played in Europe, I played in South Africa, I played in England, Ireland, and absolutely just had a blast. And so I always wanted to play in Australia as well. And so it was just sort of just like a bit of uh, just a bit of a pipe dream to come down here and live for a bit and check it out. And then I had an opportunity to come down with work, and I was a bit of a free agent because I had taken time off from my residency program to help my family and then do humanitarian work in Bangladesh. And I just thought, fine, come down here and finish up down here. And I had some friends of mine that were doctors down here that I played rugby with. A guy that I played professionally with in England was down in Perth, and so it just seemed like the right place to go.
Nice. Yeah, it's so I've had three people from Australia on the podcast, and all three of them have been from Perth, and I don't think either of y'all know each other, so it's kind of funny. But the um one thing I'm curious about, so I played college baseball. It was like the my rugby for you, I guess. It was what I focused on my entire childhood. It basically dictated all my summers, all my weekends, all the things of that sort. Was that sort of the same for you? Because I mean, if you're playing on the national team, that means you're taking it pretty seriously.
Yeah, that was basically since I started playing as a teenager. It was sort of all consuming. My sports was always um, very big to me, and I took academics very seriously, but I also took my sports very seriously. I wrestled since I was a kid, and then I started training in MMA fighting, like Muay Thai kickboxing and pancration, with some of the top trainers around. Really, Matt Hume up in Washington State, and at AMC Kickboxing, had a lot of world champions out of there, UFC champions out of there, and so I was just immersed in this the amazing professional athletic culture since I was 14, and so I was just there every hour of every day that it was open for just years, and absolutely loved it. And then I when I started playing rugby, I really loved that too, and I just sort of took all that attention, focus, and direction into rugby. There's a lot of crossover skills, like a rugby tackle is slightly different than a football tackle. Instead of leading with your head, because you have a helmet, you actually lead with your shoulder and you put your head behind because you don't want to smash your face open because you don't have a helmet. Uh, and it's exactly the same technique as a double leg takedown in wrestling. So like I already had that, and so it's just like at speed, just go and bam, double leg takedown, pick someone up and smash them on the ground. That was back when you could pick someone up and slam them on the ground. You can't do that anymore, but it was fun while it lasted. And so there's a lot of crossover skills that I got from wrestling. That fighting, it was sort of a wild west back then when I started playing. People were playing just so they could just be reckless and lawless and get away with assaulting people, because if you did something on the field that, I mean, you go to jail for if you did that if you did that anywhere else. And so you had to be able to protect yourself. And I was a younger guy, and I was like a 17-year-old kid playing with grown adults, and these the Canadian leagues and the U.S. leagues, and I was up in Seattle at the time. And so you just like I was the guy they thought they could pick on, like, oh, well, we'll just focus on this guy and mess him up, and that'd be one less player we have to worry about. We'll just get him scared and shook. And it was like, well, that's the wrong guy. And so I got in a lot of fights, and but so all my sports leading up to playing rugby were really beneficial once I got to rugby. But yeah, it was just sort of every spare moment I had, I was training, playing. I had my best friend growing up. He actually got me into rugby because we wrestled together. And so a lot of the guys from the wrestling team or from the rugby team actually joined the wrestling team to get in shape before the season. And because we had a top nationally ranked high school team, it was club. It wasn't part of our high school, but it was like the high school age team. And we were, top 2 or 3 in the nation every year. And so they took it really seriously, and I was just like, yeah, that sounds badass. And so I went and started playing that. So playing in the high school leagues, and played that 1 year, and then I started playing in the men's leagues in my second year as but still like 17, 18, and I just really took off with it. And I played for my university team, but I went directly to the men's team training straight after that. So I'd be training from like 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. every day, and then I'd be playing games for the university team and the men's team on the weekends. And I'd even try to double up and play with the premiership as well as the seconds. And then I'd play with the university team. And I even tried to play with the seconds on the university team so I could just get more games. I just wanted to play. But like the college coaches just put their foot down on that one. They're like, absolutely not. Like he's not allowed to play in the seconds game. It's just like, he's just hurting people, And I was just like, they're all older than me. I'm 19. They're like, it doesn't matter, like you're better than them. Like this isn't fair. And I was like, that's stupid. But
well,
I just played as much as I could. Really, I just absolutely loved it.
That's awesome. I just love to hear anybody that's like, because it's the same with me. Like sports, just you're immediately drawn to them, almost like subconsciously. You just like have to pursue them. That was with me. I literally remember. I think at one point I would tell people I wanted to be a professional football player, professional basketball player, and a professional baseball player when they'd ask me what I wanted to do, because it's just like I want to do all of them. But so you traveled all over the world pretty much playing rugby, and now you're a neurosurgeon, correct?
Yeah.
When?
Well, I haven't finished up, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm working on it.
When did you start the medical journey?
So I basically took like 10 years off. I started in college early, so I started at 16. So I was a bit ahead of the game, and I sort of had some opportunities with rugby. And I was just like, well, maybe I just sort of see where this goes. And because you can always go back to school, you can't always play professional sports. So I said, okay, well, let's see where this goes. And so I had some amazing years and absolutely loved it. And when I was 27, it was a 2007 World Cup. Well, so the 2003 World Cup, I was sort of invited to try out and go to camp for that. And that was a dream. I was just like, okay, I'm going to go play in a World Cup, and then just have that on the shelf, and then I can think about a medical career and all these sorts of things. And I was absolutely loving it. I was actually doing carnivore back then, unwittingly. I just took classes in college and on botany and biology, learned how toxic plants were. I had a cancer biology professor that told us he wouldn't eat plants because they were so carcinogenic. I'm like, Jesus, all right. So I just stopped eating plants altogether, and I just defaulted into meat. So I was absolutely playing phenomenally well. That was sort of some of the best rugby I was playing at the time when I was 22, and I was playing in a game, and just this dirty player, like my foot was caught in a ruck with like this sort of pile of people, and I was sort of caught down there, placed the ball back, and this guy just took my leg and just did this like alligator roll while I was sort of pinned down, and just snapped my ankle. And I actually kept playing on it because we only had like 10 minutes to go. It was sort of like in overtime. And I remember like sort of getting up, and I put my foot down. I could feel my foot like slipping away from my ankle, from like my leg, and I was like, ooh, okay, maybe I can't play on this. And my last name's Chaffee, so that's what everyone would call me. And our fullback I just hear him scream, like, Chaffee, get in there. I'm like, all right, I guess I got it in there. I'm not done. And so I sort of hobbled over to the side of the ruck, and like guys coming at me, so I like dropped down on my hands and my left leg and sort of curled my right leg up behind me, because I knew that hit the ground. My foot was ripping off my leg. There was no question about that. And so I went down, just bang, threw myself into his legs, and sort of 3-post bear crawled over to the side, and did it again. So I made like a few tackles that way, and I ended up finishing the game. But it was really stupid idea to do that, and I, because of that, and because I kept playing on it, and because of the severity of it, I damaged a lot of the ligaments in the ankle. I broke the bone, my distal fibula, and it was unstable. So my foot was out of joint. It was out of alignment with my leg bones. And so I needed to get surgery on that, and I had to do a repair of the ankle and the tendons and the bone. That's fine. And I didn't walk as a result for 5 months. And that was right when when they were getting ready to sort of call people up for the World Cup tryouts, and so I was devastated about that. So I missed my chance to try out for the 2003 World Cup, and then so I was just like, all right, well, I'm going to go for the 2007 World Cup. And I was I'd been playing in England professionally, and I was back playing really high, top level in America and doing really well. And then I was down in San Diego playing for a team called Omback, which was a great team. We had absolutely stacked side. We had 11 guys on that team. Were on that year's World Cup team. Wow. And like I was starting over, 2 of them. It was like so. It was a really good team, and so like I was getting ready. I was trying to get into that next camp for the 2007 World Cup, and then it was just a stupid incident. But the girl I was dating at the time, we were all out together with friends, and someone tried to steal her purse, and it was just like these 3 dudes, and I caught them in the act, and I just went over there and ripped the purse off of them, gave it back to her, and I ended up fighting all 3 of them, and I was pretty pissed, so I ended up hurting a couple of them, but in the tussle, I broke my hand, so I got like a boxer's fracture, and so I ended up needing to get surgery on that, and getting that pinned. The surgeon actually did the wrong surgery, so he actually pinned my bone through the front here, which actually pinned down my tendon, which he was not supposed to do. So I couldn't move my finger. I couldn't move my finger for like 6 months. Wow. And had to rehab that, and I should have plated it, and then I would have been back on the field in a couple weeks. So he really screwed me over there, and so I sort of lost my opportunity to get back in that one, and I was just like, all right, screw it. The only 2 broken bones I've ever had in my entire life were right before a World Cup, and I was just like, I'm not gonna do this again. I'm not gonna keep putting medical school off for and then just break something else. It's just stupid. Really, the only major injuries I've ever had were before these sorts of events, these big sort of moments. And other than that, I've been pretty lucky in that regard. And so that point when I was 27, I sort of got serious about going to medical school, did my MCAT, sort of cleaned up my academic resume, and got everything sorted out, and I started medical school at 29, so I was sort of late to the game, but had a great run before that, and I kept playing rugby during medical school and after, and especially when I went back to just eating meat only when I was 38. Then I felt freaking amazing, and then I actually went back and started playing professional rugby again when I was 38, because I was like, yeah, I felt like I was 22 again. I felt better at 38 than I did at 28, playing at high level. So medical school then, and I worked as a doctor for 2 years, and was pursuing neurosurgery, but my parents had a health issue. Both my parents were they both needed surgery, and it was just there was just too much going on. I was like, okay, look, I need to go help out. And my dad ended up having some complications that he almost died from, and if I hadn't been there at the time with him and caught it, like he would have died. And so that just sort of said like, okay, I don't know when I'm going to be able to go back. I can't just say I'll be gone for a month or 2 and then be back. Like I need to stay here until this is done. And that ended up being a couple of years. And then when they were sort of settled, back in a stable position and everything was fine, that was when I sort of got called up to go to Bangladesh and help out there. There was sort of the largest humanitarian crisis at the time anyway, was in Bangladesh. there was an actual genocide in what's now Myanmar, it was formerly known as Burma, and they slaughtered unofficial numbers about 200,000 people in about a month. The Rohingya people, it was basically on like it was sort of like ethnic cleansing. They were trying to just wipe out these people, and apparently this has happened like 5 times in the past or 4 times in the past, all the way back to the 1950s. They basically said when Burma became a country and stopped being a colony, they just said, all right, all of you out. And, they're like, no, we've been here forever. Like, what are you talking about? And because the thing is, when these colonies, started, there was like a whole bunch of different kingdoms and factions and things like that. But then, the British Empire or the French Empire or the Spanish or the Portuguese or whoever, the Dutch, they would take over all this area and they just put them all together and be like, this is the colony of Burma, right? Or the colony of India, right? And so, India included Pakistan and Bangladesh back then, and so it was just all these different kingdoms, all just bang, just came together. All these different countries just came together in one. And so that was the same with Burma. And so all these people that had been there forever, now they're being run by the majority that came from somewhere else, but, now that's all encompassing, and they say, right, this is our country now, you guys got to get out. And they're like, no, absolutely not, we're not going to go. And so, a fight ensued, and they got thoroughly smashed, and a lot of people, they just basically tried to exterminate every male and fighting aged male and boy. And so they sort of fled into southern Bangladesh. So there's been actually like permanent refugee camps in southern Bangladesh from that since the 1950s. The Doctors Without Borders has had a permanent hospital in that area for over 50 years. And I didn't know any of this. I'm just going over there, and I just...
Well, why did you feel compelled to go down there in the first place? What drew you to go down and help out?
I always felt that, if you have the ability to help somebody, and they really need your help, and especially if it's like some sort of life and death situation, that you have an obligation to help as well. And I was taking time off at the time. I didn't have a wife and kids that, needed me more. If I went over there and I died, it was just me dying. I wasn't going to be absent to, my kids or something like that. And I just felt that in these situations, it was a very dangerous situation, which was why I also felt compelled, because it wasn't like one of these sexy humanitarian crises like Haiti was, or Nepal or something like that, where just like everybody and their mother was just flying over there with just with good intentions, but they ended up like sucking up resources and actually making it more difficult. And so now the locals that were displaced couldn't even like rent hotels or houses or anything like that, or rooms, because the prices had just gone sky high because there were so many foreigners with more money. So the prices went up by a factor of 10, and that cost nothing to us. It's like, $5 a night, that's nothing, but that's like 10 times the price to some of these people. And so they're actually causing more harm than good. So I never had any interest in going to one of those things and just adding to the chaos. But this was one that like just no one was going, because it wasn't being televised, it wasn't being publicized, because they're actually trying to keep it hush hush on the international stage, because the lady who was president of Myanmar at the time, she actually won the Nobel Peace Prize, right? And so they're like, and she's like committing genocide,
That's ironic.
And yeah, exactly. So they just want to keep this hush hush, I think. And so they just weren't talking about it. You just couldn't find it anywhere. I could not find it. I was like, how the hell am I missing this? I watched the news. I should be able to see this. Nowhere. I scoured the news. There wasn't a single story on it. I looked online. The only thing I found was a report actually from Australia at the time. They covered it in this one obscure story. Nothing in the U.S. though. It was absolutely nothing, which was crazy. And so no one was going there. It was very dangerous. Bangladesh in general is very dangerous, and ISIS was very active at the time as well. And so they were like making attacks on any foreigners. If you look different, then you were a target. And there was like restaurants and cafes and sort of areas that catered to more of an international crowd. they were getting bombed, they were getting blown up, they were getting taken over and hostages taken by ISIS, and they would execute everyone who couldn't recite the Quran in Arabic. And so, and they would execute them.
I'm guessing you can't recite the Quran in Arabic?
No. Not off the top of my head anyway. So they would execute them, they'd shoot them, or they hack them up with a machete or something like that. And one guy, and I heard this from a couple different sources, had said, and he recited the Quran, and they said, okay, you can go. And he was just like, well, I mean, I can't leave my friends. And he's like, bam, just shot him. It's like these people don't mess around. And they bombed a hotel because there was one American staying in there. And it killed like 70 people, maimed like another 160. So it was very dangerous. And not a lot of people were going there just because of that. And so there's a desperate time. There's about 1 million refugees, and 1,000 people were coming every hour. They did not have doctors. They had some doctors. They didn't have anything close to enough. And so there were people like seriously hurt, because it may not be the place on here to talk about it, but there were some horrifically evil things that were happening that I saw the evidence of. I didn't see it in action because I wasn't in Myanmar, but hearing the stories from people and then seeing the scars on their bodies that told the truth of that was really shocking. I mean, it was like Holocaust level evil things that they were doing. I mean, just insane. Some of these things are just like wantonly evil. I don't know how graphic we want to get, so I'll sort of leave it at that. It's
pretty open podcast, to be honest. I'm fascinated by this stuff, and honestly, I'm relatively well versed in history, and I don't even know if I've ever heard of what you're speaking in. Was it Burma at the time, or was it Myanmar at the time?
It was Myanmar at the time, yeah. And so it was 2017, September 2017, and so
that's like not even that long ago.
No, that was very, very recent. So I was there from 2017 to 2018, and they asked me to stay on like permanently and run the field hospital that they had for the charity that I was there helping out with. And I said okay, because it's like, well, what do you do? It's not like who else is going to run it? It's just someone needs to do that. And so I was just like, I didn't want to. It was a very intense, it was the most intense period of my life. And there were multiple times that I thought I was going to have to like fight my way out of something and just like book off into the jungle and like try to get like an escape somewhere. But that thankfully that didn't happen. But no, it was absolutely crazy. But a couple of the things, they went to some of these villages, and just every 10-15 years when they started getting uppity, you have this, they've seen their fathers murdered, they've seen their uncles murdered, and then they grow up and they're seeing themselves get abused. They're not allowed to work. They're considered illegal aliens. They're saying, oh no, these are just illegal immigrants over from Bangladesh. It's not true. They've been there for hundreds of years, and they don't even speak Bengali, like Bangladesh language. They speak this like completely other language. They speak Rohingya. It's their own language, right? And they've seen their fathers murdered. They've been abused. Their mothers have been abused. Their sisters being abused. Rape was very common. The soldiers, the Burmese soldiers, would routinely rape them. Apparently, they found it was unseemly to rape pregnant women, and so they basically, as soon as they could get married, they would get married and just start having kids, because they would just want to be as pregnant as long as possible, so that they could at least mitigate the rapes.
Yeah.
And so then when they started wiping, you see this, you grow up and you just get, okay, we're going to fight for our rights, we're going to fight for citizenship, because they would never grant them citizenship. They were fighting for citizen rights since the 1950s, and they're just like, no, absolutely not. You don't belong here. We want you out. And so every 10, 15 years, when these young boys would grow up to be young men, you hit this sort of critical mass of pissed off, fighting age men that wanted to do something about it. They didn't have a Second Amendment. They had no guns. They go up and start something, and they just get massacred. And but then it didn't stop there. The military went from village to village to village, massacring the fighting age men and boys. And so one I heard, there was like, one survivor from this. He and like 2,500 men from his area got rounded up, and they sort of brought them over. Oh, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to wipe you out. We just want to talk to you guys and just be like, hey, we don't want you guys causing trouble, so we're just going to talk to you and all that sort of stuff. Sure enough, they brought them all out, shot them all. He got shot, but it wasn't fatal, and he just sort of pretended to be dead under the piles of his corpses of his friends. And he said that he waited there for like 6 hours, just bleeding slowly. Thankfully, not enough that it was fatal. But and they were all there. All the soldiers were there, hanging out, doing whatever for hours. And then eventually they left, and so that's when he sort of crawled away. And then it was like 160 kilometers, which would be like 100 miles to get to Bangladesh. And he was just like out of there. And so I saw his scars. It matched up. Then they would go into villages in the middle of the night. They'd barricade doors, and they'd set houses on fire and just burn families alive. And people would be jumping out of buildings, and they'd just be waiting for them to jump out of buildings on fire and like shooting them in the back as they tried to run into the forest. But some of them got away, covered in burns. And they're telling you this story, and you see they're covered in burns, and it's just like, how do you not believe that? Maybe they're lying, but you've seen this again and again and again. It's just it's not hard to imagine that, especially when you have 1 million people flooding over trying to get the hell away from this. And probably one of the more horrific ones, just the more wantonly evil ones, was a lady who had just had a baby, so she wasn't pregnant anymore, so she was fair game to be raped apparently, and she was getting raped and abused by these soldiers in Myanmar and Burma. Let's just call it Burma. Like, screw them. They changed the name from Burma. It's a Burmese python. It's not a Myanmese python. And they're a bunch of asshole and genocidal maniacs. So why do we listen to them and what they want to be called? So the Burmese soldiers were abusing and raping this lady, and apparently had been doing so for hours and hours and hours. And she was just sobbing and saying, hey, look, I have a newborn, I have a baby, she's only a year old, I need to feed her, or 6 months or whatever, I need to feed her, I need to nurse her, she can't eat unless I go back. And she just kept begging and begging and begging and begging and begging, and finally they said, yeah, okay, you can go. But before she left, they cut her nipples off, so it would be physically impossible for her to ever feed her baby again. Wow. And her baby would probably die. I mean, just like that level of evil, it just has no place on this earth, That's
incredible. That I've literally never, maybe in passing, I've never spent any time or heard anybody talk about this, and I'm very glad you brought this up, because I don't know, I'm just fascinated by it, and I also think that it's obviously something that you're passionate about, and something that you spent time of your life to go deal with, and you were in the thick of it. So how has that experience impacted, like how does that carry over to you today? Like, just knowing and having seen those things and having been there, how does that impact you on a day-to-day right now?
Well, I mean, it definitely keeps my eyes open for this sort of nonsense to happen anywhere else. And we've gotten pretty complacent here in the West, because we've had it really good for a really long time. But any student of history, as I'm sure you and others could say, is this, like, we have a very limited window of freedom and these bright spots in human history where the common person, not the ruling class, gets actual say in their life and the direction and the course of their life, and aren't basically enslaved by the government and the ruling powers. And that's why the rights of the people were sacrosanct in America, in the American Constitution, and the powers of the federal government were brief, limited, and enumerated, and specifically enumerated. And they're just like, no, you stay in your box. right? And now we kept them in their box for so many years that we just thought, oh yeah, everything's fine, everyone's trying to help. And no, that's not the case. You know, there are monsters out there, there's evil out there, and so being mindful of that and watching that sort of thing, and people say, oh well, no, that's not going to happen, that can't happen. It's like it damn well can happen. I've seen it happen. It happens right now all around the world. You know, when you get out of the Western bubble and you start seeing what's going on in the Western world, there is absolute chaos out there. There's true evil happening around the world, and you know, being in those circles, in those you know, in that humanitarian sort of groups, you're talking to people who sort of do this as a career, and they bounce from one place to another, and you start finding out about all sorts of insane things all around the world that are happening. You have no idea. They never make the media. And that's because, you know, the media has a narrative, and they want to paint, you know, Western culture and the Western world as the most evil and depraved, sick culture that's ever existed. And if you show the true evil that's happening around the world right now, obviously that just shows the lie and how absurd that is. You know, I mean, it was kind of crazy. The day I heard about that, I started scouring the news. I'm like, how the hell did I not see this? And so I must have missed it. It has to be somewhere. They must be talking about this everywhere. Just went from news station to news station to news station. No one was talking about it. It was all just hyper polarized politics and American politics. And one, you know, they got some shrew of a lady who was, you know, this white hair in a bun, scowl on her face, woman talking about microaggressions. I don't know if people remember what the microaggression era was, but that was something. Microaggression, by definition of the time, was, and you know, definitions change every single day by every single user, so whatever. But at least at the time, it was microaggression was something that isn't traditionally thought of as offensive. Normal people wouldn't think that that's offensive. The person who said it didn't mean it to be offensive, but somebody just decided that it offended them or would offend someone else, and they were offended on their behalf. That's a microaggression, right? And it's literally no harm done, but it's a microaggression because it's an aggression. It's violence, and violence is the same as murder. And if you're allowed to match violence with violence, so this is a microaggression. So you were aggressive against me. I found what you said offensive, even though you didn't mean it offensively. No one else thought it was offensive, and I get to attack you and assault you and punch a Nazi. That's where all that bullshit came from. And so this lady was talking about that, and so she was saying, well, you know, microaggression is the same as aggression, it's the same as violence, that's the same as murder. And so right now, because of all the microaggressions going on in America, the largest genocide in human history is happening right now. People are dying, it's just killing people by doing these microaggressions. I'm like, bitch, there is a real genocide happening right now. Like, what are you talking about? You know, if you go around, and I tried to explain, actually, there was a guy named Burtis. He was a commander in in Bangladesh. He was a commander in their military, in their armed services. He was since retired, and he was sort of, you know, he ran the charity that I was volunteering at, and we talked. He was a really nice guy, very, very sweet natured, down to earth sort of guy. And we were talking one day, and he's just, you know, happy. You know, I was trying to explain to him what the hell a microaggression was, and he was just like, what? What? He just couldn't wrap his head around it. You know, when you face the daily threat of macroaggressions, microaggressions just don't make the radar.
It's a luxury. It's a consequence of luxury.
It's absolutely a luxury. If you have the luxury of giving two shits over something someone said that wasn't offensive to anybody else in the room, wasn't traditionally offensive, and wasn't meant to be offensive, like, you live a blessed life. And I'm really thankful that you have such a wonderful, nice, sheltered, beautiful, carefree life. That is the worst thing that's ever happened to you, is someone offended you who didn't try to offend you. I mean, who wasn't being offensive. I mean, it's just like that is the most absurd shit I've ever heard in my entire life.
And then you've got women in Bangladesh, like you're talking about, with like getting her nipples cut off, and like it just is. It's such a crazy. That's why I'm so interested to hear that you went there. And I mean, there's a lot of missionaries and humanitarian workers out there that are doing that type of stuff. The perspective that I'm sure that gives you, like in that day-to-day interaction, it probably, in my opinion, or at least from my perspective, it would help ground you in like what's actually happening in real time in the world, as opposed to like what's going on in just the curated, hyper polarizing political landscape of the West, if that makes sense. It kind of makes all that seem like just complete BS, because it really is.
Yeah, well, it definitely puts things in perspective. And so, you know, when you look at these sorts of things, these things that people are just freaking out about, and it's just like, this doesn't mean a damn thing. This doesn't matter. You know, these things just don't matter. And, you know, but the thing is that the people propagating them know they don't matter. They don't actually care about it. It's not a cause that they're actually pushing. You know, the people that they you know, entice and convince that this is important, they fully believe, they're really firm believers, and they're very passionate about it. And so, you know, I'm not taking anything away from them, but the people orchestrating and stuff, they know this is just made up stuff. This is just a way to manipulate people and try to get what they want. And you know, there's a lot of evidence for that, and they're not even being sneaky about it now. They're actually saying we need to tear down America. We have congressmen in America who are saying that we need to tear out the Constitution, we need to tear this down and tear this. It's like you sign an oath swear an oath of office when you become a, you know, a government official, and you know, an attorney general or a judge or a congressman or a senator or whatever, to uphold and defend the Constitution. And these people are openly saying we need to tear down the Constitution and reform the country. You should be removed from office immediately. You know, you should be impeached immediately. You know, you are completely violated your oath of office and your sworn duty to protect and uphold the Constitution. And you know, and then they're doing it. You know, they're doing things that flagrantly go against the Constitution and the protected rights of the so-called free people, which we're not anymore, unfortunately. But you know, we'd have to change a lot of things to get that freedom back. But you know, just you see what's going on, and you know, traveling is a really good teacher. You know, it's not just, you know, even just traveling for vacation, just for fun, but you know, just going out and just exposing yourself to the wilds of the world, going to places, countries that language you don't speak, and just trying to figure it out, and going from place to place to place, and just figuring out how to survive. It's really eye-opening in a lot of ways. And then going to these areas that are extremely troubled, extremely impoverished, and extremely dangerous. You know, you see what can actually happen when society breaks down, and what could happen, what the life of the normal citizen could be. It's extremely impoverished, extremely dangerous, extremely short, and extremely restricted in a lot of ways. And so if we don't want that, we need to recognize what's going on, and we need to recognize the things that we need to do to protect our way of life, and to hopefully bring that way of life to more people. You know, these sorts of principles, these ideas of liberty and freedom, and independence and freedom from the government, so that we can live our own lives. That's brought more prosperity, economic and otherwise, to more people than any other system in human history. And it's the only thing that brings people out of poverty. It's the only thing that brings people out of slavery and serfdom. Serfdom is slavery. And for some reason, supposedly educated, intelligent people living in that system are now sprinting back to serfdom. I mean, there's a book by Nobel Prize winner Friedrich Hayek called The Road to Serfdom. It said, look, there's certain things that happen that policies that people try to enact, and different things they try to do to try to push these countries to tear down the free societies and go back to an oligarchy, monarchical, or tyrannical state where everyone's a vassal and a servant and a slave of the ruling class. That's the entirety of human history, except for these few hundred years of freedom that Western countries have had, starting with America and sort of leading by example in a lot of other ways, but building on the Magna Carta and the other sort of teachings and doctrines and freedoms that have slowly built up over hundreds of years in England and the West. And those were, all these others are built upon, the ancient Greek and Roman Republic, and and they were just bright spots. Just as there's one empire, there's one country just had, a republic for a certain number of hundreds of years, and then it was back to tyranny with the Caesars, and then all the Greek democracies. There was hundreds of these things. There were hundreds of constitutions, democratic constitutions. They lasted about 100 to 150 years, and they all ended in tyranny, every single one. And you were sort of coming to the end of that. We're coming to the end of our freedom and going towards tyranny, and that's what Friedrich Hayek wrote about. And a lot of these places have turned to that. And he's just saying, look, we're going back towards serfdom, we're going back towards slavery. This is what you watch out for, and that's sort of what I'm seeing.
How important do you think diet and the health of the people are in that movement, in that sort of like sheepish shepherding towards what you're I believe accurately describing, like the road to serfdom? How important is diet and things like that?
I think it's more important than people realize, because if you're healthy and you're vital and your brain is working and your hormones are working and your body is active and healthy, you have the freedom and the privilege to be able to think about other things besides just your immediate health. When people are sick and they're tired, they're just trying to survive. They're just trying to just get through their day. They're just miserable. They're depressed. They have mental health issues. They have hormonal imbalances. Their energy is absolutely destroyed. They're sore. They're aching. Someone in their 20s is just in pain all the time. It's just absolutely ridiculous how bad food can be for you. How bad food can be bad for you. So when you are weakened and your health is impoverished, you're in no position to put up any sort of fight or struggle. And you don't even want to. You're just like, I just can't do it. I just don't have energy. Oh, God, no. Oh, I really wish this wasn't happening, but I just can't do anything about it. When you're healthy, when you're vital, you just be like, absolutely not. It's just like not a chance in hell. And you have a lot of people that are healthy like that, and they're not willing to be enslaved like that. You have a bigger fight on your hand. This is not new. This is not a new tactic by would-be tyrants or in-place tyrants and dictators. The British Empire restricted meat supplies to all sorts of people that they were trying to occupy. The Irish, just the British citizens, the serfs. The commoners stayed on the commons. That's where the wheat and the plants were grown. That's what they were paid in. That's what they were allowed to eat. And the meat and the cattle and the hunting areas, the woods and everything like that, that was for the nobility and the aristocracy. Those were the king's woods and king's deer and all that sort of stuff. So the commoners could get some meat. They get a lot of times what they would do, they would catch rabbits. There were just rabbits all over England, and they just bred like rabbits. And so there were a lot of these things, and that was basically the best source of meat that they had. But they had to sort of fill in the gaps with a lot of other stuff that wasn't that great. Poaching could end up getting you hanged, And so, but people did it because they were just starving and they just needed good food. But in India, they took people out of the forest, they took them out of the countryside, then they put them on these colonial sort of plantations and had them growing cotton, or not cotton, but wheat and all sorts of different cash crops and tobacco, coffee, whatever they were growing, and they paid them in grains. They paid them in grains, but they were hunting. They say, oh, everyone was vegetarian since Hinduism. That's not true. That's not true at all. That's only very recently. Is actually you can see the in the consumption data and the production of commodities that no, that's actually not true. And you have pictures of people like in the 1800s, and they were like, like bows are just ripped. They look like, like Native Americans or Native Australians are out there hunting that bow. They're just shredded. And then these are guys in India. They were going out hunting. And so they were displaced off of their land. They were displaced out of their natural hunting environment, and they were just put on to work in the farms and things like that. And so, back in ancient Rome, this was something that I learned last year. Everyone knows that the phrase bread in circuses, when people are getting uppity and they're like, hey, we don't like what the government's doing. Rome used to hand out a lot of bread, free bread for everybody, and they would put on a bunch of circuses and displays and theatrics. They'd feed a whole bunch of Christians to lions and things like that, and get everybody all happy and cheery. And so it's bread, okay, so it's plant-based, sort of wheat, whatever. And it's like, oh, okay, they're just giving out free stuff and distracting you, like junk food and Netflix. But
yeah, I was about to say, it sounds familiar.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the thing. It's just like during all the lockdowns and things like that. That's what it was. They're like, oh, hey, you do what you're told, and you'll get a free hamburger, you'll get a free fries. It's like, ooh, sign me up. And so what they didn't tell you, what the other side of that coin is, that doesn't make the phrase bread and circuses, doesn't make it into the statement, is that they didn't only just give out a bunch of bread, but they actually cut off the meat supply to Rome. So they stopped people from being able to buy meat, but they were giving out free bread, so it didn't matter. You can't get meat, but hey, here's free bread. And so people just eating a whole bunch of bread and just watching the circuses, and they just calm right down, And then it's just like, it's not that big a deal anymore. And you get a bunch of brain fog, you're just tired, and you're just like, oh, yeah, maybe I'll fight for my freedoms tomorrow. Bill Burr actually did a great, he's a stand-up comedian. He did a great, skit on that. He's like something about how McDonald's was like, it's great for just controlling the populace. He thinks it's just to control people and just keep them docile, because you can have all these hopes. Yeah, I'm going to go this. I'm going to conquer the world. I'm going to do this, and then you have a Big Mac meal and fries and this and that, and then you're on the couch. You're like, fuck my dreams. I'm just going to stay here for a while. Just like, and it's true. It's completely true. People just give up on their own life because they just feel miserable. Whereas when you're eating properly, you get revitalized. I mean, I was 38 years old, and I felt like a middle-aged man. Even though I was eating very clean, I was eating a clean omnivorous diet. I still mostly ate meat. I was eating low fat, and I was eating a lot of vegetables. And my body was just breaking down. I was tired. I was in the refugee camps for 16 hours a day. I was shattered. It took a lot out of me, and so it was rough, and it was very difficult. And then I get home, and I'm trying to get in shape, and I'm trying to get back to play rugby, and then all of a sudden I figure out that I just realized from a lesson I received in second grade that humans are apex predators, and apex predators are carnivores by definition. We've been apex predators for 2 million years, and all animals have a species-specific diet. I mean, that's just a well-known phenomenon, that biologically animals have a species-specific diet that they have to adhere to, or they can get very, very sick. You feed a carnivore a bunch of plants, they will get very sick. If you feed an herbivore the wrong plants, they will get very, very sick. They only eat specific plants. You feed them other plants, they can get sick or they die. And so that's true for us, just as it's true for every other life form on Earth. We are not from a different planet. We did not get dropped here by Martians. We are of this Earth, and the biological laws apply to us. And so that sort of hit me, and I just went, okay, that makes sense. Humans actually are carnivores. This is the kind of animal we are, and that's what I was doing for 5 years in my early 20s before I sort of slipped off of it for various reasons.
What led you to start that in the first place when you were in your 20s? Because I mean, that was certainly way before it was quote cool or making a comeback or whatever. What was the thought process there?
That was it. It was just from what I learned in college. So I learned, I'd already taken biology, I'd already taken botany. I learned in 7th grade that plants and animals are an evolutionary arms race. Plants becoming more and more toxic, so less and less animals could eat them, so they can survive and thrive. And then animals becoming more and more adapted to specific poisons in specific plants, so they can eat that plant and survive and thrive. This is why koalas eat eucalyptus. Almost nothing else eats eucalyptus. But they don't eat anything else because they can't. They have the defenses towards the toxins in eucalyptus, but they don't have the defenses towards the toxins in other plants. And same with pandas and bamboo, or cows and certain grasses. They can't eat all grasses. It's only specific grasses. And so, there's different animals that eat leaves, but they all eat different kinds of leaves, right? And maybe you could eat the same leaves in a family or species and genus of plants. They have similar sort of toxins, so maybe there's a variety there, but it's not wide. You're not getting animals that are just eating thousands of different plants, or certainly not plants from multiple different families. Like that's just not really going to happen, and not commonly anyway. So I learned all that. I already knew all that. But then you learn that. You learn like diet is species specific. Plants are toxic. You have to be evolved to eat a specific plant, and then go home and eat your vegetables and don't ask questions, right? And humans have been apex predators for 2 million years. So not eating vegetables, and if you're out of an evolutionary arms race, you're not going to be equipped to handle the toxins in vegetables, and yet go home and eat your vegetables. It's just like there's just a complete disconnect between what we know and is in books and what we teach children, and then what we actually practice as human beings. It's a total disconnect. And so that was my professor of cancer biology at University of Washington in Seattle. That was in my undergrad. That he was telling us just how toxic plants were, how carcinogenic they were, how Brussels sprouts had 136 carcinogens, had mushrooms had over 100, and spinach and broccoli and kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, zucchini, like whatever. I mean, we're given lists with and they had the number of carcinogens next to them. There wasn't a single one under 60. I mean, I looked through. There's multiple pages, and it was just like there wasn't a single one under 60, and most of them, were above that. And so we were just blown away. We're absolutely shocked. And I remember like looking around, like he's got to be joking. Like who's in on the joke? Like is there like a TA laughing in the back or something like that? And no one was laughing. And so I was just like, okay, that's crazy. We just realized, okay, this guy's serious. And I remember just like thinking in my head, I'm like, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? I mean, after all that, like just this indoctrination, you're just like, but they're still good though, right? And he just looked at us and he said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. I was like, right, okay, I'm done. And I just stopped. I just stopped that day. I went to the grocery store and I was just walking around. I was just like, all right, well, my only criteria is that it doesn't have plants. But it's like everything had plants, and everything was made from plants or was plants or from plants. And there's so many different varieties of plants. I was like, what the hell is going on? I was just like, okay, I came across some eggs, and I'm like, eggs? Okay, eggs don't come from plants. I guess I'll get some eggs. Meat doesn't come from eggs. I guess I'll get some meat. And so I just ate eggs and meat for 5 years and never felt better in my entire life, never performed better in my entire life as an athlete. It was absolutely night and day. And, there's like this, like, what's it, Erlich Haaland or something like that. Oh, I always butcher his name. The soccer player is like Manchester City. He was, he was 21. He's already a top player, but he went. I believe he went carnivore at that time. 21 years old, he grew another like 4 or 5 inches. At 21, it was just crazy. And then now he's one of the top strikers in Europe. And so he's absolutely crushing it. So, that was it. I mean, that's. I didn't grow 5 inches, unfortunately. That's a shame. That would have been great. But I did my athletic potential and just my performance just absolutely went unmatched. I mean, I was just in such insane shape. I literally couldn't get tired. I couldn't run out of energy. I made it a point. I'm going to be at the front of every single sprint, every single drill, everything. I'm going to win every single time, every single one, forever. And I just pushed myself. It took me a couple weeks to be able to build up the fitness for that. And after that, it was every single thing, every single time. There wasn't a single person that could beat me on any sprint, on any drill, on anything ever after that. And I wasn't even like one of the fastest guys on the team, but I just did not stop. And I was a faster guy on the team, but not the fastest. but I put every single ounce of it in there. So it was just like every single sprint, every single time. Like I was just going to win every single time because I was going to work harder than everybody every time. Whereas like other people, they might do is like, okay, we're going to do like 10 100-meter sprints. So, you're going to have, 20 seconds rest in between or 30 seconds rest in between. So a lot of people will dog it the first few times. I'm like, I'm not. I'm hauling ass. I'm going as hard as I can every time. And so I'm just way ahead of everybody. And I'm way ahead every single time, because I didn't wear out. And they're pacing themselves the whole time, so they're never going full out. Maybe the first one they could have beat me on because they're faster than me overall, but they didn't push themselves. I always push myself. And so I just performed at a much higher level, and because I trained to, but my diet allowed me to as well. And then looking back on that when I'm 38, and I was just like, that was it. That's what I was doing. I was eating a carnivore diet. Humans are carnivores. It's just the kind of animal we are, and that's what I was doing. And so I went back, and I was like, right, I knew it. I knew plants were trying to kill me, get rid of these stupid things. And I realized when I came back, I wasn't eating much carbs in Bangladesh, except towards the end, because I was just getting so run down. I just thought, I was like, well, I just need the energy. I just need to pack in, because I'd get breakfast and that was it. And I was sort of off for the day. It would be like 16 hours or something like that, and may or may not get something to eat. So I just wanted to just fill up on as much stuff as I could, and that wasn't great. I was sort of avoiding carbs early on, and then and so I was staying a bit more trim. And then towards the end, I was just sort of packing in the carbs, and it was going the other way. And I was like putting on fat and putting on weight. And when I came back, I definitely had a lot of spare ounces to lose. And it was like just a few weeks back that I came to that realization, and I was like, right, get rid of these stupid plants. And but I had already stopped eating carbs when I got back, because I realized that when I ate carbs, my back hurt a lot more. I'd have more joint pain. I'd just be more sore and stiff. And so I just naturally went away from them. I wasn't like doing a ketogenic diet consciously. I was just like, anything with carbohydrates that make my back hurt more. So I'm like, screw that. I'm just not going to eat it. And so I was just eating a lot of vegetables and a lot of lean meat, because I was trying to trim up and get ready and go back into play rugby. It didn't feel good. I had horrible energy. It just felt gross all the time, always hungry, mental fog, low energy, just not feeling good. I was working out. I was lifting weights. I was working out daily. And just didn't feel great. Then I just dropped the plants, just the vegetables. It was spinach, kale, and broccoli. It's all clean. It was nothing processed. Just whole food plants and lean meat, and just spinach, kale, broccoli. I dropped those out and just started eating as much fatty meat as I was hungry for every single day. I was just eating ribeyes, just fatty ribeyes every day. So I even melt butter in it sometimes. And I would just eat until I wanted to stop. I just ate every single day until I was full. And as a result, I probably quintupled my caloric intake, and I lost 23 pounds in 10 days. And then I just felt amazing, and all this inflammation was out of my body. I just looked like I just deflated. I was just full of like inflammation and water weight. It was just gone. It was just gone. And I just felt amazing. And I was like, all right, I feel good. It's time to go play some rugby. And I realized it was like, this is what I was doing when I was 22, and I feel like I'm 22 again. And I went out, and I was just like, all right, it's my first practice back. I hadn't played a full season since 3 years. I was 35 the last season I played, and now I was 38. So just 38 though, so maybe 2.5 years. But in any case, a long time. And so I was just like, okay, well, do I ease into it and just sort of see how I go and all that sort of stuff? And I'm like, nah, screw that. Like, I could just push myself and go all in when I was 22, when I was eating this way, to see if I can do it now. And so I just went as hard as I could. I was just at a dead sprint the whole night.
Felt fine.
Nothing. It was no problem. And so like I was joining in mid-season with guys. It just, rugby just turned fully professional in America. So it was the Major League Rugby league had started at the time. So my team in Seattle, Seattle Saracens, turned into the Seattle Seawolves, and they won the first 2 years of the MLR. That was the first season. So I was playing with them in that sort of preseason going into the season. I guess the season sort of already started then, but the Premiership league that we played in Canada was already preceded that. So now we're getting into the MLR, and so they were sort of they were sort of halfway through the season already and just starting the MLR season, but they were halfway through the Premiership season. So they were like in mid-season shape. These guys were in great shape. They're professional athletes. Some of these guys were international players from England and elsewhere. And they were great athletes and they were great players. And I was able to just keep up with everybody in the practice. And just, we had scrimmages. I was just at a dead sprint, keeping up with everything. And I just felt great. There was no problem. And I didn't feel, oh my God, I'm gassed, I'm horrible. I just felt great the whole time. And my friends who were now, that I grew up playing with, they were all older players that I was a kid when I grew up playing. I learned to play rugby from them. They're all the managers and coaches now for the Saracens and the Seawolves. And they were like asking me, it's like, hey, you've been really good. You've been keeping in shape. You've been, staying fit. And I'm like, no, I haven't. Like that is 100%.
No, I just eat ribeye.
That's it. Yeah, it was just like, no, that's all meat, man. That's it. And even then, like 2 weeks after that, we had a fitness test. It was called the modified bleep test. And I came in like top 5 or 10 in that after 2 weeks of practice out of 92 players. And this is mid-season for them. It was all diet. I was still fat and tubby, and I still had a long way to go before I was in shape. But because of my diet, I was just able to go. I was just able to push myself. I was able to get every single ounce of athleticism out of my body, whereas everyone else was being held back by their diet. It makes a massive, massive difference.
What's your take on blue zones? Like, because I'll preface that with saying, like, I mean, you see sort of like the same thing with like the Netflix documentary Game Changers, and then whatever the new one that they just dropped. Then you also have whatever that Netflix documentary about the blue zones and all this stuff. It's like it's being propagandized by the mainstream. So I think a lot of people look at the blue zones and think, wow, this is the answer. What's your take on that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the reason they're being pushed by the media is because they're being paid to. I mean, there's a lot of money behind this, and it's sort of weird. There's a religious organization called the Seventh-day Adventist Church, who in the 1800s they had this vision from God that said meat is bad, it causes lustful feelings, and lust is a sin, therefore meat is a sin, and they've just been pushing this ever since. Oh, well, that's crazy. Well, no, actually, because one of the Seventh-day Adventist church members was a kid named John Harvey Kellogg, who grew up to be Dr. Kellogg and founded Kellogg cereals and was a very famous and influential doctor. Carnegie went to him, Rockefeller went to him, Henry Ford went to him, presidents would go to him. Like, he was a very famous and influential doctor, and he prescribed and pushed a vegan plant-based diet and made plant-based processed foods in order to replace a meat diet. And he was insanely wealthy in the end, and obviously his heirs and his company that bears his namesake is one of the largest companies that has ever existed, and now they're just perpetuating their own market share. But that ideology started that, and the Seventh-day Adventist Church actually founded something like 20 different cereal companies just themselves, and they're still owned by the church. They get tax exempt status, so they don't have to pay taxes on any of these things. The largest cereal manufacturer in Australia is called Sanitarium Foods, and they're owned by the church. They've never paid taxes on these things, right? So I mean, these people are very wealthy, and now they have an ideology that's backed by a multinational, multi-billion-dollar processed food industry. And they have medical centers all over the world. They have a medical school in America in Loma Linda, and this is where a lot of the peer-reviewed literature goes through on nutrition. And they just go, oh, plant-based, there you go, check peer-reviewed. Yes, it's good. Go for it. It's crap. It's complete and utter garbage, and they pay for these sorts of things. So Dan Buettner, I believe, is a Seventh-day Adventist church member. And so he's pushing this crap. It was at least supported by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and the Seventh-day Adventist Church actually bought the blue zones from Dan Buettner for $68 million, I believe. So there's a lot of money behind it. And so the Seventh-day Adventist Church is pushing this. They're paying, if you want to get something out there, you just pay all the media companies millions of dollars to push it out. They get it on Good Morning America. I'm like, oh, the blue zones. Oh, I didn't know. There's all this stuff is scripted. I mean, it's nothing that they actually wanted to talk about. It's just whatever the corporate masters are saying. This is what you're talking about today, and maybe they have some say in that. But if if the corporate powers want something talked about, that's what's being talked about. So the blue zones, I mean, they're eminently corrupt. You know, they come. You have to look at the source. You have to look at who's paying for these sorts of things. It's not independent research. It's not a study. First of all, it's not the blue zone studies. There's no such thing as the blue zone studies. It's propaganda. This guy went around to these different areas and just lied about what he saw there and said, "Oh, when I went there, they're all plant-based. They don't eat plants, and they live a very long time. They live, you have a lot of people living over 100." And it's just a complete and utter lie. He went to a lot of places that actually eat a lot more meat than many other places. He went to Sardinia, and I know a professor of archaeology and paleoanthropology who studies ancient cultures and ways of making food. And he actually went there. There's a guy named Dr. Bill Schindler who wrote a book called Eat Like a Human. Sorry?
I had him on the show. He's a great guy.
Oh yeah, great. So great guy, and he went there. And he went to Sardinia, to the epicenter of the first blue zone, and he met with the same people that Dan Buettner did. And Dan Buettner said, "Oh, these people, they only eat meat once a week. Oh, it's just so great. They're so plant-based, so great." And he went there, and Bill went there, and they were like saying to him, they're like, one of the first things they said to him was like, "Why does everybody think we're vegetarian? Why the hell do they think that? Like, what the hell's going on with that?" And he was saying that every single house, they weren't fully carnivore, but they were extremely heavily meat-based. They all were eating meat all the time. They all had pigs in their yard. They made their own cheese. They had goats. They had sheep. And they had every single house you go into, there'd just be a charcuterie board in with like all these like, you know, hams and preserved meats and prosciutto and salamis and things like that. And they would have some plants like some olives, fresh tomatoes, and you know, they have like a local wine that they'd make. And that was pretty much it. Pretty much other than that was meat and cheese. And so they was eating tons of meat and cheese for a few days. He's doing his research. He's, you know, talking to different people, learning different things, and he's just eating tons of meat. They're just like, that's all they're eating is just meat. And then after a few days, his host comes up to him and said, "Hey, tomorrow we're going to eat meat." And he's like, "What do you mean tomorrow we're going to eat meat? We've been eating more meat than I eat at home." And no. What we mean is we get a whole sheep and we put it on a spit and just do it, you know, roast the entire sheep over a spit, and you'll get all the organs, put them out there, and roast those up as well. And then we just eat meat for like 8 hours straight. And so, you know, Dan Buetner's going around saying this like, "Oh, well, they only eat meat once a week." And it's just like, really, Dan? You know, that's what he's talking about. That's what they're talking about, because they said, we eat meat once a week. We eat meat. What they mean is an all-day barbecue where they just feast on an entire animal. And the other days they eat other types of meat, but that's just a fresh big thing that they eat. And so it's just a flat-out lie, you know. And so, you know, talking about like I know people who are from Okinawa, whose families are from Okinawa, whose grandparents are these people being spoken about, living in their late 90s and over 100. And they say like, yeah, 80% plus of what they eat is meat and fish, you know. And so, you know, it's just a flat out lie. And he gets called out on these things, but he says, "Oh, well, you know, that's because, you know, they sort of moved in and moved like McDonald's in. They started eating more meat, and that's actually what's causing the problem. You know, their life expectancy has actually gone down because they started eating more meat." It's like bullshit. First of all, when you add McDonald's into a place, meat is the least amount of ingredients in those meals. You know, you have some little, you know, 2-ounce burger patty and 3 pieces of bread and a bunch of sugary sauce made out of, you know, mayonnaise with seed oils. And you have, you know, a nightshade in potatoes, deep fried in what used to be, you know, used as machine lubricants and seed oils, and then like a massive, super big gulp sugary drink. Like, yeah, it's the meat though. Yeah, that's what it is. They started eating more meat, and that was the problem, not all that shit. And so, you know, it's a complete and utter nonsense, you know. So, and then he talked about, you know, Loma Linda and well, they're religiously anti-meal. It's very curious that he talks about Loma Linda and the Seventh-day Adventists. It's almost as if they paid for it, almost as if he's of them. And And so we're talking about them like, oh yeah, they're just religiously anti-meat, have all these people living over 100 and all this sort of nonsense. Well, that's actually not true either, because the Seventh-day Adventist church members, even in Loma Linda, they have a higher proportion of people that are vegetarian, but the vast majority of people just eat a normal diet. And they may live slightly longer than Americans. I think that those numbers are probably changing, but the fact of the matter is that they don't just have difference in diet. They also, have rules about not drinking coffee, not smoking cigarettes, not drinking alcohol, not doing drugs, not having slovenly behavior, not sleeping around and living to excess, and having a family and strong community connections. Those are all things that are very important to both happiness and health and longevity, certainly. So that's this confounded. Oh, but they eat plants. That's the only thing that matters, is that they eat more plants. Well, some of them do, some of them don't. And the fact of the matter is they didn't identify other blue zones that didn't fit that narrative. Now, a lot of the blue zones that they had were flat out fraudulent, like Okinawa, like Sardinia, and elsewhere, Costa Rica even. And but what about the Mormons in America, who actually have a longer life expectancy than the Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda? And they have no such restrictions on their diet, right? What about that? Why aren't they a blue zone? And they have the same restrictions on smoking, drinking, coffee, cigarettes, all these sorts of things, and family values and all that sort of stuff. So why aren't they a blue zone? Because they're not vegetarian, so it doesn't fit the narrative. Well, what about Hong Kong? Hong Kong has the highest life expectancy of any population on Earth right now, and they eat the most amount of meat per person per day per year on Earth right now. So what is that? They have the highest life expectancy, and yet they're not considered. Singapore has successively increased its life expectancy over the years, and they have also at the same time been increasing the amount of meat that they've been eating over those years. So what's that about? It's almost as if they're related. There's a study out of the University of Adelaide here in Australia, in southern Australia, and they did a study looking at 175 countries, and correcting for socioeconomic disparities and other sorts of confounding factors. They found that in all 175 countries, more meat consumption was related to higher longevity and better health. So, the idea that these blue zones just are the answer, that's not even hard science. That's not even in the published literature. That's not like a study that has been published. That's just some asshole who sold out to the Seventh-day Adventists, making up a story and then writing a book about it and just lying, basically, and selling out for $70 million. And what about all the anti-blue zones? All these areas that are very highly plant-based and actually have miserable, short lives full of disease and hardship. The entire continent of India, or subcontinent of India, is plagued with malnutrition and health issues. They have one of the shortest life expectancies on Earth. It's like 64 years. Hong Kong's 84 years, or maybe 86. And it is the case that it's sort of a developing country, so they have other sorts of things, infectious disease and accidents and more violent crimes and all these sorts of things. But it is also true they have one of the highest rates of chronic disease in the world, and one of the highest rates of metabolic syndrome, one of the highest rates of diabetes, one of the highest rates of heart disease, one of the highest rates of cardiovascular mortality. If I remember the statistics correctly, it's something like 1 in 4 people from India will die of a heart attack. 1 in 3 men will die of a heart attack. There's massively greater numbers of sick and chronically ill people that not just getting killed by heavy machinery or something like that, but dying from chronic disease and illness that is brought about by eating crap food. They're largely plant-based. Most of them are largely plant-based. Typically the poor, typically those who really can't afford anything, those who can get like fish and things like that do. Those who can get things like ghee, grass-fed ghee from butter, do. and they get these nutrients, and then other people can't. They're too poor. They don't have access to it, and they get sick, and they die. And they have, again, some of the worst chronic disease rates in the world. And typically you'll find that in the more impoverished areas where they can't get meat, they are the most sick. You have the people like the Maasai in Africa who were, nomadic herders, and they have like their cattle, their livestock, and they drink their blood and they drink their milk and they eat meat, and they go and fight, literally fight off lions and cheetahs and things like that, and like beat them away from their kill and like drag the body away, which is just wild, and they're just so casual about it. Like the video of this guy just like whipping a cheetah in the face with a switch, and the other guy's just dragging it off. And they're just so chill about it, and the cheetahs are just freaking out, and they're just like, yeah, whatever, get off, go away, and they just take it like that. So these people were extremely healthy. There was a large study done by the British back in the late 1920s and published in a book in 1931. It was like 170 some pages long, and it was just teeming with information and data there. They looked at these people, the Maasai, and they wanted to compare. They wanted to compare the diets of the local tribes. So they had the Maasai, who was basically carnivore. They did start incorporating some millet seeds at the time, which was traditionally not part of their diet whatsoever. But even in the 1920s, they'd started incorporating some through Western influence. But their neighbors, the Akikuyu, were largely vegetarian. They largely ate a lot of grains and a lot of seeds, and then the women would eat the grains and seeds, and also more greens and vegetables and things like that. And there was a massive disparity in health and development between them. And they were alive at the same time, in the same area, in the same conditions, and they intermarried. They were genetically related people, right? And they've been in the same area for centuries. And so they've been interbreeding for centuries, at least, right? And there were massive disparities between them. Just the developmental disparities were stark. So you could have like a tall Maasai, they go over to the Akikuyu, and their kids would be shorter because they'd be stunted because of the poor diet, right? And so on average, across the board, the Maasai men were 5 inches taller. They were 23 pounds heavier of lean body mass. There's not an ounce of fat on these guys. And they were 50% stronger in physical strength. Right, but they were also far healthier, and they looked at all the different medical records at the clinics and the hospitals. The Maasai just basically never came in there. Like, oh, all right, well maybe they don't have access, right? So they went out to the villages, and they went out to the villages and went from village to village to village, and they started doing medical assessments on people and checking things out. And they spent years doing this, and they found they basically had none of these illnesses. The Akikuyu were far sicker. They get far more infections, far more tropical disease. They get different sort of like tropical ulcers and other sorts of problems. They have a lot of vitamin deficiencies, and even when the British would supplement them with different supplements to make up for the different points of malnutrition, they didn't actually get better. They didn't actually like help them with their illnesses and fight off diseases and things like that. It wasn't until they replaced the plants they were eating with meat that they got better, right? So there are more nutrients than we know of in meat, and that's certainly true. But also, plants are directly harmful. Plants have defense chemicals which are toxic, and so you remove those plants, or at least reduce those plants, even those clean, whole food plants. I mean, they were growing this out in the middle of Africa. There's no 5G. There's no pollution. There's no anything, right? There's just like a vegan's dream. They're just out on a commune, just growing, their millet, and they were very sick, right? And it wasn't until they started eating meat that changed, right? So, they don't talk about these sorts of things. They cherry pick. They picked one place that eats less meat than other places, and that's Loma Linda. All the other ones are an absolute lie. And so they couldn't even find places that had like longer longevity or better health that ate plant-based. it was like Loma Linda, and there's arguments to that. I know people in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and they're the ones saying, actually the ones that are like hardcore vegan, plant-based, they're actually the ones that are super sick, and there's actually a super high rate of chronic disease and autoimmunity, and it's typically in the ones that are like super ardent plant-based operators. The ones that are actually doing better are the ones eating a standard diet, just more normal omnivorous diet, but they have that social structure and that family structure and the societal structure, and they're not smoking and drinking and doing all that sort of stuff as well, and that obviously helps. So it's they're misleading at their core, and a lot of the blue zones are just not plant-based whatsoever. And then they don't talk about all the other blue zones that are heavily meat-based, or at least not plant-based, and they just ignore them. And then all the anti-blue zones, all these places that, like the Akikuyu, like the people from India, like all the other impoverished areas around Africa and the rest of the world, or even in America. I mean, 75% of the American diet is a plant-based diet, right? We are plant-based, right? And everyone's sick.
Yeah,
And
everybody's fat and sick.
you go into the more fat and sick, yeah, and you go to the more impoverished areas, they have a higher obesity rate, and they have a higher disease rate, chronic disease rate, and they eat a higher amount of this processed plant-based garbage, because it's cheap and it's readily available, and they give it out, for basically for free from the government. So what about all these anti-blue zones? What about that? So the guy's just a shill. He's an ideologue. He's either a Seventh-day Adventist and or being paid by them. He was paid by them. We know that. He's set $68 million. He sold that bullshit idea to them for. And I believe he is a member of the church, but I'm not 100% sure. But he certainly worked with them, and he certainly sold his soul to them.
It's almost like the modern version of the 7 country study by Ansel Keys, and one thing that study to me at least it's really, you could look in any corner of the Western world and find corruption, but like if people have never heard of that, go look it up. 7 countries, Ansel Keys. You'll probably, one of the first few articles will be about how it was a lie and how he just cherry picked data. And that's, correct me if I'm wrong, that's literally what like most of the dietary guidelines for America for the last like 6-7 decades was founded on a literal fabricated cherry-picked study. Yeah, and it was not even good. I mean, it's correlative. It's correlation. It's not causation, right? And they're saying like, oh well, look, you have this correlation between countries that have higher cholesterol and they have higher rates of heart disease. It's like, okay, well, the problem is that should have been called like the 21 country study, right? Because they had full, complete data for 3 times that many countries, or almost 4 times as many countries. And he just decided not to use them because they were just scattered all over the map. So and people can make excuses for that all the time, but the fact of the matter is he omitted those studies fraudulently, and that's fraud, and he did a lot of other fraudulent things as well. He also went to Europe and studied these areas during Lent, when a lot of these people will stop eating meat for the entire month of Lent. The blue zone. Oh, that's another thing with the blue zones. They did similar things like that. They would go there during Lent and go, oh, look at that, they don't eat meat. Yeah, religiously they're like Eastern, Greek Orthodox. Like no shit. And like you knew that, you're a liar. And the other thing is that a lot of these places in the blue zones were actually perpetrators of pension fraud, because a lot of the guys that when they started looking into these people, saying like, okay, well, this is a bit weird, because the places that are living way longer than everybody else, they're actually poorer areas, which is typically not seen. It's usually the more affluent areas that have better access to food and healthcare and education and all these other sorts of things. And they're not doing hard labor and all that sort of stuff. And so they typically have a higher life expectancy. So I was like, well, that's a bit weird. And when people started looking at it, they found that some of these people, a lot of these people had actually lied about their age, so that they lied about their age basically 30 years ago, so that they could qualify for a pension earlier, because they were poor and they wanted money.
And so they forged their documents and got signed up for a pension. And so on the books they were like 110. They're actually like 87. So and then other people that had died already, right? And some of these elderly grandmother or aunt who had died, basically just tucked it away, had a home burial, and didn't tell the government, and just kept collecting that check. Yep, Nanny's here. She's just in the bathroom. We'll take their check. Thank you. And so they just kept collecting checks, for someone who was deceased for the last decade or more. And they're like, wow, she's getting old. What is she, 132? That's amazing. We should have a party or something like that. Oh no, she's busy. And they figured it out. They found that these guys were committing pension fraud. So a lot of, and then Dan Buettner tried to say that too. Like, oh yeah, well some of these things are coming off the blue zones because they started eating more meat. And McDonald's came in, they started eating more meat. Well, we talked about McDonald's, how that's not meat. The vast majority of that is garbage, plant food. And but also these things got taken off the blue zones because they were committing pension fraud and they lied about their age. But because this wasn't a real study and he's not a real scientist or a real academic, he's just a real asshole. He didn't look into that, right? Or just didn't even or actually intentionally misled people. But these people were not as old as he said they were. And so they don't have as many people over 100 as they said they did. And they eat a lot more meat as well. So, it's there's a lot of problems with these sorts of things. But sorry, I sort of went on a bit of a tangent there. And
it's all related.
Sidetracked.
It's all related. The thing that I'm a very much so, I don't know what you would call it. Like, I got told a piece of health advice when I was younger by a healthy a family friend, and he said, use your eyes. So I use my eyes, I use my ears, I use my taste, my body. And to me, intuitively, so I haven't eaten vegetables consistently for, a long time, probably a couple years at this point. And one of the things, like all this information is great. It's totally important. And I think it's what certain people need. For me, intuitively, when I learned about like taste buds and how our palates have evolved and things like that, I'm like, okay, why when I was a kid would my parents put a ribeye or a steak in front of me and I would devour it within seconds? Why would they have to incentivize me to gargle down asparagus or broccoli? You know what I'm saying? It's like our taste buds are taste buds for a reason. They crave certain things for a reason. And the reason that spinach and kale taste horrible is because our body doesn't really want it. And the reason that a fat ribeye tastes delicious is because our body really wants it. So I don't know if that's something that that you relate to, but that's how I think about things a lot.
Yeah, well, and as you should. Deer don't go around eating the shitty tasting leaves. They eat the things that taste good to them. That's what taste is there for. And people will say, well, you can eat candy and that tastes good, so obviously that's everything else is untrue. No, there's like more than one thing can be true at the same time. Things that are good for you taste good. That's true. Things that are bad for you can taste bad. They can have a bitter taste. When your brain recognizes a harmful chemical, your brain can say, that's not good, don't put it in here. And you get this bad taste, like, oh, that's a bad reaction. Your tongue is your gatekeeper, and you say, oh, okay, get out. Now, it is also true that there are things that aren't good for you long time in large quantities that can taste good, like sugar. Sugar, fructose in particular, is the sweetest carbohydrate. Normally, carbohydrates actually don't taste that sweet. Potato is very bland. That's all glucose. It's in the form of starch. And but even individual glucose molecules are very mildly sweet at best. And lactose is mildly sweet, except if you get go carnivore and you haven't eaten anything sweet in a long time. Then milk tastes like you're drinking ice cream. It's much more you're much more sensitive to that sweet flavor. But most people don't find milk sweet. I find it sweet as hell. But most people don't. Most people are like, what do you mean milk is sweet? It's like, but yeah, it tastes like I'm drinking ice cream. And so I don't drink it because I'm like, I want more of that. And so the fructose is much more sweet, much more sweet. And the thought there is that we don't know of anything containing fructose that is acutely poisonous to humans. that is going to kill us that day. So it's something that we recognize as safe. We sort of recognize that taste and it's like, okay, that's safe for me. That's not going to kill me. I can eat this today. I can survive. So if you're sick or you're starving or you can't get food, that's something that can sustain you. But when are we coming around fructose? It's in the wild. We're going to come around it for a few weeks every year. It's going to be local berries and fruit, and they're not going to be any of this fruit that we're eating now, because the fruit now is bred to be much, much, much sweeter, tens of times sweeter than they would be in the wild. Normally it'd be just very sour, very tart, barely any sweetness at all. And now they're much more sweet. And so, because we're just basically growing candy on trees. And so we recognize that as something safe. And so we say, okay, we can eat this. This is safe. And so now, when we've now isolated it, we've now bred crops to be much more sweet, have much higher sugar, and now instead of having 2 weeks out of the year, and then it's winter, and you just have the rest of the year to burn this stuff off. And during the ice ages, there is none. You're not going to get any fructose. You're not going to get any fruit. You're not going to find any honey. You got to figure out how to get past bees. I mean, those things just sting you to death. They'd swarm you and sting you to death if you were going that. We had to figure out fire and how to use smoke to smoke them out. That's not an easy thing to do. You're going to be in trouble trying to get that honey. So it's not something that we're coming across all the time. People didn't have beehives, 50,000 years ago. And so, let alone, 500,000 years ago. So this is something that we came across very infrequently. And when we saw that, our brain went, yes, that's safe, get that, right? But so we were never going to eat it in the amount that we're getting now. If you do eat a lot of it, it can actually be quite harmful. It can cause a lot of problems long term. And so that's the thing. Now we've refined the sugar. We put it in bags. We have fruit that is insanely sweet. We have fruit juice that has as much or more sugar than Coca-Cola. And we're just it's just teeming with this stuff. Instead of having fruit for 2 weeks out of the year that's fresh, local, and ripe, we're getting this stuff packed in picked green, which is worse, by the way, because it has more toxins in it if it's picked green. And they don't go away because the plant has to pull those toxins out of it. People can look that up if they want to. That's studies with tomatoes where they picked them green, and they found that the toxins in there didn't go away. There's actually toxins in there. People don't realize that. And they're much more prevalent when it's green because the seeds aren't ready and they're not ready to be, to germinate. And so they have a higher toxic load at that time. And if they ripen on the tree or on the vine, then the plant pulls out those toxins. If you pick it green, they're separated from the plant. There's nowhere for those toxins to go, so they stay there, right? So even when they ripen in the box or whatever, they still have all those toxins in there. So we're not getting these things fresh and picked ripe, and it's not 2 weeks out of the year and a much lower level. We're getting it every single damn day. They're picked green. They're ripened in a box. They have much more sweetness. We have refined sugar. We have just bags of honey, as much as you want, and we now eat sugar measured in pounds every day. The average person in most countries eats half a pound of sugar a day, right? The average American eats 170 pounds of sugar a year. This is insane. That's an insane amount of sugar. So it's something called an evolutionary trap, where you have this go signal that would normally be very self-limiting. And so your brain just goes, yeah, that's safe. And now you're getting a mouthful of it, and it's huge, and you're just like, whoa, okay, get that. And when you combine that with salt and fat, that's a really addictive combination. So food scientists have figured this out to give you that go signal, and you may go, oh, I gotta eat. And sugar raises insulin. Insulin suppresses our satiety hormone leptin, which makes us overeat. Sugar independently blocks leptin and upregulates ghrelin, which is our hunger signal. So I have to eat, I'm starving, I have to eat. And so you get hormonal signals to eat more as well. And you're getting this go signal from your brain. And so you end up eating a ton of this stuff. It's called an evolutionary trap. A good example of this is with hummingbirds. Certain hummingbirds, they go in the little red flower that has a sort of canonical shape. And and it was red color. And so there were these connectors on electric fences on some farms out in the Midwest that had these red connectors, and these hummingbirds would come down and it would just look enough like this flower that it's just like, ooh, that's where I get my food. And it was going sticking its beak in there, hitting the electric fence, and dropping dead. So it was just killing these things by the drove. And they had to figure out, like, oh crap, they're going after, they think it's a flower, and so they changed it to like yellow ones, and it stopped, right? So this is our evolutionary trap. Our brain is telling us, yes, get that, do that, and we're just getting sucked into this, and we're just massively overeating. And the food companies know this, and that's why there's sugar in everything, because it's heavily addictive, and because it has that go signal, that evolutionary trap. And food scientists are very clever people. I wish they would use their powers for good instead of evil, but that's who's evil is paying them, and so that's what they're doing. But they're figuring out these different chemicals that exist in foods that have that go signal, that ooh, that's good. And they isolate those chemicals and they change them so you get a big burst of that flavor, and it goes away quickly. And they said this. I saw this on 60 Minutes. They were talking to a food scientist who said this. So you want that big flavor, and it goes away quickly. So you want another experience of that big flavor. And the 60 Minutes guy said, it's like, oh, so you can make it addictive, so they eat more. And they're like, oh, well, no, that's not what we're saying. It's just like, that is what you're saying. And so you get that big go signal. You go, oh, that big burst of flavor, and you eat that, and it goes away. And you want more, and you want more, and you want more. So you get a good signal, that you get that go signal from eating meat too, from eating fatty meat. The difference is that it's self-limiting, because your body can actually track the nutrients, macro and micro, that you eat. And it goes into your stomach. You have sensors in your stomach that track up your vagus nerve to your brain and tell your brain how many macro and micronutrients that you have. And your body tracks nutrients. It doesn't track calories, right? And so you can eat a whole bunch of these big flavored nothing chips or candy or whatever, screw with your hormones, depress your leptin, spike your insulin, spike your ghrelin, all these sorts of things. But there's no nutrients in there. There's no real nutrients in there. So you're eating all this stuff. There's calories. It's calories galore. We're overfed and we're undernourished. And everybody has multiple nutritional deficiencies, to the point that the reference ranges have had to slide down, because everybody was so far below the reference range. They had to renorm the reference ranges. I said, well, everybody's low, so I guess no one's low now. No, everyone's low. So you need to eat. That's why in my medical practice, I don't look at the normal reference ranges. I look at the reference ranges that are used for healthy people that don't have nutritional deficiencies. It's a very different scale, right? And so, and so that's the thing. So people are getting fatter and sicker, but they're getting less and less nourished. They're getting more and more nutritional deficiencies, and that's because they're taking these chips and they're getting this big burst of flavor, but it goes in their stomach, and their stomach goes, yeah, there's nothing here. We need more. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. So you keep eating, you keep eating, you keep eating, you keep eating. It's like the Pringles commercials. Bet you can't eat just one. It's like, yeah, okay, that's what you want. You want people to just stuff their face with this stuff and never be able to stop eating. That's the design. But when you're eating steak, you get that big go signal. You get that, yes, that's good, and you eat it, and then it goes in your stomach, and your stomach goes, yeah, okay, that's how much we need. So we need a little bit less, and so we don't need as much anymore. So every bite you take tastes slightly less good, and slightly less good, and slightly less good, until finally you take a bite and just tastes like cardboard. Why is that? It's the same piece of meat cooked at the same time in the same way. It should taste exactly the same, just like every Pringle chip should taste exactly the same. But it doesn't, because now your stomach sees, like, or your brain sees it, like, hey, we've got all the nutrients we need. Stop now. So you get a stop signal. You don't get a go signal. And so that's the difference. So you can, yes, things that are toxic to the body should taste bad. I have a book called, don't have it here, but it's called Most Delicious Poisons. It's from spices to vices, all the different plant toxins that we use for either our food or recreation. It's by an evolutionary biologist and a professor of biology at UC Berkeley, who talks about all the things I talk about, how toxic plants are and how these things are not there for us to eat. And they don't want us to eat them. They're there for their own devices. And that those strong tastes from the spices, etc., that's actually the most toxic part of the plant that we're tasting in our brain. That's not the plant tasting like that. That's our brain responding to that chemical and screaming at us like, no, not that one, spit it out,
Yeah.
right? And then we're eating the stuff because we're idiots. But that's how that is. If something tastes really strong and negative, and you have a mouthful of cinnamon, people doing the cinnamon challenge, that was hilarious.
I've done it. Yeah, I've done it.
Of cinnamon. You've done it,
Yeah.
yeah. Did you get it
It's
down?
tough. No. I almost threw up.
Yeah, well, there you go, right? So it's like your body is just rebelling. It's just like there is so much poison here. It's just like it's self-preservation. It's just like, it's like eating a Tide Pod. It's just like your body's just like, no, like this is gonna kill you. Like, don't do that. And so that's what your body's doing with those bad tastes. So things will taste bad if your brain recognizes these toxic things in there. And we can denature them, we can change them, we can hide them in different ways, and then maybe that slips past our guard. But a lot of if it tastes bad, it is bad. That's a good rule of thumb. And so when kids eat something, it's like, well, that tastes horrible, and they're like crying and like, no, I don't want it. That's a pretty good sign that you shouldn't eat it, and you certainly shouldn't force them to eat. Now, you can give that kid cake if you're an asshole and a child abuser, but you shouldn't. I mean, that's going to hit that evolutionary trap, and that's going to trick their brain into thinking, ooh, go. But, they're going to get that same go signal from a steak or a piece of bacon, and that's actually good for them. It'll be self-limiting. And that kid who just stuffed his face until he's puking on cake and ice cream will stop eating a steak. They will eat until they're just like, yeah, I'm done. And it's exactly self-limiting. Their body will tell them exactly what to do. And if you're eating what you're designed to eat, you should be able to have that. All animals in the wild have a self-limiting. They all stop. And people think like, well, no, all animals they just voraciously eat and they just stuff themselves, and then because maybe they don't eat again. So anytime they do get a chance to eat, they just gorge themselves. That's not true. I mean, koalas live in eucalyptus trees. They live in their food, right? And they never run out of resources there. They have no natural predators. They're just sitting there, high off their ass all day, just eating leaves. And they could just keep eating until they just turned into blimps and just died of diabetes and fell out of the tree. They don't. Something tells them when to stop. Koalas look like koalas all across the world. They're not some like obese ones, and no, that one just doesn't have. That one didn't exercise, or that one didn't have self-control. Cows, they just live on their food. It's like living on a giant pizza and just like eating it constantly. They could just do that, and until they just like were puking. They know when to stop. Something tells them. Lions, king lion gets to eat before any other lions get to touch that carcass after they make a kill. He gets to eat as much as he wants of what he wants. It's called the lion's share. That's where that phrase comes from. And so he eats the belly fat, the fat in around the organs, and it gets all the choice bits, and then at some point just goes, I'm done. And then he goes away, and the rest of the lions come in and finish off the carcass, right? So why is that? Why would, if they just naturally just gorge themselves, they have just an insatiable hunger, they just have to eat, why wouldn't he keep eating? And why wouldn't he just go until he was fat and sick and puking and just rolling around and going, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. Something told him to stop. Something tells us to stop if we're eating the correct diet. If we're eating an inappropriate diet, nothing tells us to stop. We don't have a stop switch. We have to take drugs to suppress our appetite. We have to, have coaching. Oh, you just have to have, you have to have, to withhold yourself from eating this. You have to just limit your calories. You have to restrict. You have to. No, you damn well shouldn't. No, that would never have flown in the wild. No one would be. I mean, when did we have health coaches telling us this garbage? It's very recently, right? For the entire existence of humanity, people just were naturally slim, they were naturally trim, just knew how to eat until agriculture, until people started eating a whole bunch of plants, until the idea of cuisine came in. We started adding all these sorts of things together just to make the enjoyment of the experience, be something. It's a novel situation that we're in right now. And even then, we had almost zero obesity. 100 years ago in America, the obesity rate was like 1.3%. And people would say like, well, maybe people had less access to food. And yeah, maybe, but not in the 1970s when it was like 6 or 8%, right? You look at videos in the 1920s in New York, everyone was just slim and trim. They're all wearing suits. People had a lot more respect for themselves back then. They had a lot more health and integrity in a lot of ways. I mean, we are just we're a very decadent society now, unfortunately, and unfortunately that might mean that our society is not going to be here much longer unless we really start turning things around. But even in the 50s and the 40s and the 60s and the 70s, people just slim. There's all these things going around the internet. Picture of a beach in the 1970s, or New York in the 1970s, and then a beach now. It's just like in the 1970s, not a single person that's overweight. Everyone was very slim and trim, and then now it's almost no one is slim. It's almost the exact opposite. So, we are not able to listen to our natural signals, and I think it's hurting us, and I think that's a clear sign that we're not eating what we're supposed to. You shouldn't have to limit yourself. You shouldn't have to say, I want to eat, but I'm not going to eat. That is unnatural, and if you are doing that, you're going against your own biology, and you're doing something that is clearly incorrect. You're eating something that is giving your body and your brain the incorrect signals. So you have these very smart people that are designing food to give you those wrong signals so that you overeat. And people think that this is hard somehow. It's like, no, this is very obvious. This is very clear. This is their job. This is what they do. They telegraph it. And then we're saying like, oh, well, it's just our own lack of self-control. Like, what the hell are you talking about? I mean, these foods are designed to be addictive and compulsive and inflict compulsive eating. And if you eat your natural food, it's self-limiting. It stops tasting good, and your body perfectly tracks your calories. I mean, what animal on earth needs to track their calories? I mean, have you ever seen a kangaroo or koala pull out a calculator to figure out their macros? I mean, that's insane.
Yeah.
Like, nothing should have to count their macros. Nothing should have to limit what they eat. Nothing should have to go. Like, a blue whale doesn't go. It's like, well, there's some krill, but you know what? I had a lot of krill yesterday, so I think I'm just gonna chill.
Watch my figure. Yeah.
No, that's not what it is. They eat hunger. Yeah, exactly. I just want to keep it slim. So it's nonsense. If you are eating your natural food, you should be able to listen to your natural instincts. And if you're not able to listen to your natural instincts, or you'll get sick and fat, you are clearly not eating what you're supposed to eat. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, I love that you talked about the evolutionary trap. That's not a term I've heard before, but it reminded me of the idea that like we're wired for scarcity, but we live in abundance. And I think it's the same thing. It's because I was actually curious about your take on that. So like the Comanches, for example, who were like heavily meat based, I find it hard to believe that if in the spring or summer or whatever season, whatever fruit was local to the environment, I find it hard to believe that a Comanche wouldn't pick up like an apple, and if it was ripe, and be like, oh yeah, I need an apple. But you're exactly right. It's for maybe a handful of weeks per year, and it's going to be as fresh as it can possibly be, and it's going to literally be no glyphosate, no all the pesticides, no toxins or anything like that, and it wouldn't be in abundance like you mentioned. So I think that's super important. And I in my own life personally, I can tell you, last night is a great example. I had steaks with Harry, who from Meat Mafia, and I'm sitting there, and we had a lot of steak. I think we cooked like 3 ribeyes, 2 strips, and a picana. So it was a lot of meat, and I'm sitting there. I'm like, there was meat on the table still. I love the taste of steak, and I ate my fill, and I said, you know what, I'm good. It wasn't like I have to keep going back, It was just one of those, I think that's a perfect example of what you're just saying in terms of the limitations that our bodies impose on us. It's absolutely true in my experience.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can overeat on a carnivore diet. It's really difficult. I mean, you have to force feed yourself. Your body is telling you in no uncertain terms, stop eating. Just cut it out. It doesn't taste good anymore, and you start feeling nauseous and upset because your body's just telling you, cut it out. Like, what the hell are you doing? As you were saying, like, maybe people did, eat fruit every now and then, or maybe came across a beehive or something like that, and were able to smoke them out or something like that. But it's very limited, and that's a luxury of the summertime, right? In of course the world, it's like Game of Thrones, like winter lasts just for years and things like that. Winter is coming, all that sort of stuff. Our species and our ancestors survived majority of the last 2 million years through ice ages, living in frozen tundra, living in the frozen north. The Homo habilis did not run away towards the equator. They went up into the ice as the ice sheets started coming down. There's no fruit available. There's no honey available. There's no tubers available, right? So they're eating meat, and that's what they're doing the whole time. And so even if you do come across this, you're not always gonna come across it. And so the thing is too is interesting. If you look at the early records from the New England settlers in America back in the 1500s, they were talking about how the Native Americans up in the northern parts of Maine and what's now Canada, almost no one lived there. It was like French fur trappers and Inuit, like that was it. It was like no one lived up there. And because it was during the mini ice age, it was bloody cold, and it was basically inhospitable. And some of these guys, the settlers, it was basically a few months out of the year, it was thawed out, and they said that, okay, well, I get it, it's frozen most of the year, you just have to eat meat. But these people eat meat all year round. Like even during the summer months, it thaws out for a couple months. They don't eat anything. They don't plant anything. They don't forage for anything. They don't collect anything. They don't gather anything. They just eat meat all year round. And he was shocked by it. He was like, this is crazy. Like, why does he do this? I get it. You're forced to during the winter, but they do it just all summer. And they said surely during the summer they could live off the bounty of the land, but they don't. They just keep hunting. And so, even in the areas that they could do it, a lot of times they didn't. You talk about the Native Americans down in the Great Plains, eating bison, things like that. Sure, maybe they did. I mean, I'm sure some did, but a lot of them didn't, in fact. And the thing was that you talk about how we're built for excess. We're built to sort of survive starvation, things like that. We've got to eat. I don't think that's actually true. I think that that's something that we observe because people are just voraciously eating and getting way overweight and fat. We're like, oh, okay, well, we have to limit ourselves because normally the environment would limit us. But now we have to limit ourselves because we're built for something different. I don't think that's true. I think it's the food that's causing us to do that. Where if we're eating a normal food, we wouldn't do that. So example of this and proof of this is that the Plains Indians in North America, when they were hunting bison, they didn't go out hunting every day. They waited for the buffalo herds to come through, and they scared a huge chunk of that herd over a cliff. It's called a buffalo drop. And they'd fall and crash and burn. And that was food for the year. And they would dry that food, they mix it with rendered fat, and they make pemmican. It was 80% calories from fat, 2 grams of fat to 1 gram of protein. And that was this dried meat, and they stored it in sacks with a fat lid over it. And that would last decades. They found this was iron rations for armies back then, the redcoats during the Revolutionary War. They had a cache of pemmican that the Americans found 50 years after the Revolutionary War, and the pemmican was still good. So this stuff lasted forever, and that's what they would eat, right? So they had a year's supply of food for an entire civilization sitting there waiting for them. After they herded the buffalo over a cliff, and they spent the next few weeks drying the stuff out and crushing it and turning it into food. They had food for the year, So they could just gorge themselves every day and turn fat and piggish and not be fine. They didn't. Their bodies naturally stopped them when they were supposed to. People talk about how that sometimes they put berries in the pemmican. That's true, but not for their own consumption. That's actually what they sold to the Europeans because the Europeans were like, oh, no, we want it sweeter. We don't want it just with the meat. And they're like, okay, it's like the meat is what's valuable. Berries, they just grow on trees. Sure, fine. We'll put some berries in it, And so that was for them. That's not what they ate themselves. That was what they sold to the white people. It's like when you go to like a Vietnamese restaurant or something like that, or a Thai place, and you get like yeah, I want spicy. They're like, oh, okay, yeah, I get spicy. It's like white people spicy. They don't mean it, And so 100%. It's like it's just ordering off a different menu,
Yeah, I want to clarify. So when I meant the we're built for scarcity and we live in the world of abundance, I was referring to like the specific context of sugar would be the example in this context of the conversation.
Well,
So like we are built for not having that in our pockets or in our refrigerators or in our pantries or at our offices or in vending machines everywhere we go or on billboards or at every single restaurant. We're not built for that. We're built for it. If, like you mentioned, if we consumed it, I think it was seasonal at best and not at all, if at all.
Sometimes,
So yeah, I think that's wild. The pemmican, like, is that exactly, because I know that you I've seen you post about Carnivore bar before.
Mm-hmm.
Is that like the same? Is pemmican like a specific fat to meat ratio, or like what makes something pemmican? If that makes sense.
It's it's more of just the technique of drying out meat and then crushing it. Generally, you use like big like rocks and stones and like big giant mortar and pestle sort of things, and they would powder this. They just grind it into powder, and they mix it around. The traditional way of making it is 50-50 powdered meat and rendered fat by weight. And what that ends up being is about 2 grams of fat to 1 gram of protein. And the Carnivore bar, yeah, does do that. They do it in a slightly different way. They don't like sort of crush it up. They dry it out in sort of a different fashion, but the same idea. It's the same sort of mix and ratio, and so they get 2 grams of fat to 1 gram of protein as well. And that's the thing. I mean, so Carnivore bar, it's like, it's just just that little thing, right? And but that's equivalent to half a pound of grass-fed steak with a lot of fat, right? And so that's a lot in a little bar. I sort of worked it out a while ago, and if I remember correctly, I think that pemmican, when it's mixed in that ratio, gets 3/4 of a pound is about 2,000 calories of perfect nutrition.
Oh wow.
And so, if we're saying, then, do you actually need 2,000 calories? Do you need more? Do you need less? Who knows? But if we're going off to just the 2,000 calories a day model, just 3/4 of a pound. So if you're going backpacking, you're going camping, you're just going traveling, or just waging a war, 10 pounds of pack weight, it's 2 weeks of perfect nutrition, right? So it's actually fantastic, and it's just small, just very, very compact, very highly nutritious. And there are some reports that I read that the Native Americans actually preferred the pemmican. They actually didn't like when they had fresh meat and fresh beef and all that sort of stuff and fresh game. They were actually like, okay, can we get through this now? Like, yeah, we got the fresh stuff. And I was like, okay, I want to get back to the pemmican. They seem to really like it. They really like the pemmican. So, it's and the thing is too, we have likely been doing that for much longer than that. It wasn't the Native Americans who figured this out. This was figured out a long time ago. This was something that was passed down through many thousands of generations of humans and pre-Homo sapiens, I should say. We have evidence that people were doing this with mammoths over 1 million years ago. So we're doing mammoth drops over 1 million years ago, scaring them over a cliff, crashing and burning using stone tools to carve them up. During an ice age, you sort of have a built-in freezer. Your world is a freezer. You just stick it in the side of a snowbank, and you can come back and get it. But potentially, at some point, in between those ice age periods, they would have to have figured out how to preserve that meat. You take down a giant sloth. You're not eating that in a day. That thing's going to eat, feed you and your family and your entire colony for 2 months. And so you need to be able to preserve that and dry it out. And we've been drying meat and preserving meat forever. There was not a time there isn't a point where people pinpointed like, ooh, this is when we figured out how to dry beef. It's just like we've just been doing it. It's just been passed down throughout it. Yeah, exactly. And so it's very likely that we've been doing this for 1 million years or longer. It's quite possible that we've been doing mammoth drops for 2 million years or more, because we were hunting them, right? And that's a much easier way of doing it. And but the ice ages, you're up on these big, glaciers coming down. There could have been entire civilizations, and skyscrapers and all these sorts of things in between the ice ages and things like that. I mean, people had the same capacity for thought and language. Homo sapiens have been around for 300,000 years. We haven't changed all that much. Our technology has changed. But in between those ice ages, the next ice age is going to wipe out everything man-made, and so who knows, when the ice ages come and the sea levels go way down, huge tracts of land all of a sudden come out, and it could very well be that that's where most of the seas were, because most of the time human dwellings and establishments were on waterways, were on the coastline. Well, those coastlines are very different. What is now the coastline was a mountain range during the ice ages. And so that's not where people necessarily lived. So it's sort of interesting, but yeah, the evidence can get wiped out very easily. And so you could have had evidence somewhere that we don't know about that got wiped out and erased by in between the ice ages. All over the place, going back 2 million years. We're going to have all these civilizations, and the glaciers just come in and just wipe them off the face of the earth, and and then they're gone now. Just dug in 500 feet down into the ground, and we might never find them. So who knows? But we've been doing this for a very long time. We've been hunting big game for a long time. We've been doing mammoth drops for a very long time, and we've been preserving meat for a very long time. And so, we've had big access to a large supply of food for a very long time. And somehow we know how to limit ourselves, which is pretty telling. That should tell you that is what we're supposed to eat. That's our biological design, and that everything in us is telling us this is the right thing for us.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that it's pretty clear if you look at American Indians, or just cultures in general. Like, meat has been the staple of the human diet for a very long time. And I'm curious, like, after when you were speaking, I kind of had this question: if it's possible, if you could describe your nutritional philosophy, I guess, in a sentence, what would that sentence be, if that's possible?
Well, it's just to eat in a biologically appropriate way. Eat the food that's biologically appropriate for our species. That's pretty much it. All food is species specific, and that goes for humans too. I think that our biologically appropriate food is high fat meat. I may be wrong. I think there's a lot of evidence to support me, such as all my patients getting a lot better and healthier objectively on their blood tests and imaging and subjective summary. But it is something. There is something that is optimal for human beings, just like there is something that's optimal for giraffes. There is something that's optimal for koalas. There is something that's optimal for lions and blue whales. And so I think that that's the most important thing. You don't need a bunch of studies and take this group and that group and do a survey and ask a question and think about what you ate and think about this. What you need to find out is what's biologically appropriate for the human species. That's it. Once you figure out what is biologically appropriate for the human species, that is what you're supposed to eat. And the best data shows that humans have been eating meat and apex predators, and exclusively or near exclusively eating meat for millions and millions and millions of years, since before there were humans. And so the immutable law of biology is that of adaptation. What you've been exposed to the longest is what you're most adapted to, which is what you're biologically optimized for. And for us, that's meat. So to go back to the one sentence, eat to your biological design, eat to your species-specific diet. And once you figure that out, all the rest of it becomes easy.
Nice. That's awesome. We're over 2 hours, so I can't thank you enough, Dr. Chaffee, for your time and your insights. Absolutely fascinating. I'm very well going to go eat some ground beef right now in the spirit of this conversation.
Nice.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
No problem, man. Happy to. I'm glad we were able to connect, and I appreciate you having me on.
Right on.